In the shadowed corridors of power, where ambition meets opportunity and fortunes are made or lost with a single misspoken word, there exists a fundamental truth that Niccolò Machiavelli understood with crystalline clarity: silence is the sovereign's most potent weapon, while speech is often the fool's sword turned upon himself. The Florentine philosopher, writing in the wake of his own political downfall, recognized that in the delicate dance of human affairs, timing determines whether words become stepping stones to greatness or tombstones marking the death of dreams. Consider the moment when revelation becomes devastation. It was a warm evening in Renaissance Florence when Lorenzo de' Medici's trusted advisor made his fatal error. Flush with wine and eager to impress a gathering of merchants, he revealed the details of an upcoming trade negotiation that would have secured Florence's dominance over rival city-states. Within hours, the information had reached Venetian spies, and, by dawn, Florence's advantage had evaporated like morning mist. The advisor, once positioned to become Lorenzo's right hand, found himself exiled before the week's end. His tongue had cost him not just his position, but his very future in the city he had served faithfully for 2 decades. This moment exemplifies the first and, perhaps most dangerous instance when talking costs everything, revealing strategic information before the proper time. Machiavelli observed that those who rise to power understand that information is currency, and spending it carelessly leaves one bankrupt of influence. The successful leader knows that every piece of knowledge has its season, and revealing autumn's harvest during spring's planting ensures a barren winter. The psychology behind premature disclosure runs deeper than mere carelessness. It stems from a fundamental human need for validation, recognition, and the intoxicating pleasure of being the bearer of important news. Yet Machiavelli warned that this pleasure is fleeting, while its consequences endure. The person who reveals strategic information prematurely transforms from an asset into a liability, from a confidant into a cautionary tale. In modern boardrooms, this principle manifests with equal brutality. Corporate executives who leak merger plans to impress colleagues at industry gatherings often find themselves not just terminated, but blacklisted across entire sectors. The technology startup founder who boasts about revolutionary features before securing patents watches competitors rush similar products to market while her funding evaporates. The political operative who hints at campaign strategies to gain favor with journalists becomes the scapegoat when those same strategies fail because opponents were forewarned. The second moment when speech becomes self-destruction occurs during emotional vulnerability, when passion overrides prudence. Machiavelli understood that humans are creatures of feeling as much as reason, and, in moments of high emotion, the carefully constructed walls of discretion crumble like ancient fortifications under cannon fire. The anger that compels someone to speak truth to power often results in speaking themselves out of power entirely. History records countless instances where emotional outbursts destroyed promising careers. The Roman senator who publicly criticized Augustus during a moment of personal grief found himself stripped of rank and fortune. The medieval knight who questioned his lord's decision during a heated council meeting was stripped of lands and titles. These men believed their cause was just, their emotions valid, yet they failed to recognize that justice and validity offer little protection against the machinery of consequence. The modern executive who explodes at a board meeting, revealing frustrations about company direction, may feel momentarily vindicated by speaking their mind. However, that moment of catharsis often marks the beginning of their professional demise. Board members remember not the validity of concerns raised, but the lack of emotional control displayed. They begin to question whether such a person can be trusted with greater responsibilities or sensitive information. Machiavelli's insight penetrates to the heart of this dilemma. Emotional authenticity and political survival rarely coexist peacefully. The successful individual learns to channel emotion through strategic expression rather than explosive revelation. They understand that every emotional display is evaluated not just for its content, but for what it reveals about character, judgment, and future reliability. The third catastrophic moment arrives when individuals reveal personal weaknesses or failures in misguided attempts to appear human or relatable. Modern leadership advice often encourages vulnerability and authenticity, yet Machiavelli would caution that the timing and audience for such revelations determine whether they humanize or destroy. The leader who shares personal struggles with alcoholism during a company all-hands meeting may intend to inspire others facing similar challenges, but may instead plant seeds of doubt about decision-making capabilities that flourish into career-ending concerns. This principle extends beyond addiction or mental health issues to encompass any personal limitation that could be perceived as professional liability. The financial advisor who mentions personal debt problems while trying to relate to a client's situation inadvertently undermines confidence in his ability to manage others' finances. The marriage counselor who discusses her own divorce during a session may believe she's demonstrating empathy, but instead raises questions about her competence in helping others maintain relationships. Machiavelli recognized that leadership requires a carefully cultivated mystique, a perception of competence and control that inspires confidence in followers. This doesn't mean leaders must be perfect, but it means they must be strategic about when, how, and to whom they reveal imperfections. The successful leader understands that vulnerability shared with trusted advisors behind closed doors can strengthen relationships and improve decision-making, while vulnerability displayed publicly often weakens authority and invites challenge. The fourth moment of verbal self-destruction occurs when individuals criticize superiors or powerful figures without first securing alternative sources of support. The natural human tendency to bond through shared criticism creates an illusion of safety that Machiavelli would recognize as deceptive. The junior executive who agrees with colleagues' criticism of the CEO during a casual lunch conversation may feel she's building relationships and demonstrating insight, but she's actually creating evidence that can be used against her should those relationships sour or circumstances change. This dynamic plays out with predictable regularity across all hierarchical organizations. The military officer who questions command decisions among peers, the academic who criticizes department leadership during faculty gatherings, the hospital resident who complains about attending physicians to fellow residents all believe they're engaging in normal workplace bonding. Yet each critical comment becomes a potential weapon that can be deployed against them when convenient for others. The fifth moment involves the revelation of ambitious plans or goals before securing the resources and support necessary to achieve them. Machiavelli understood that announcing intentions before possessing the power to fulfill them invites opposition from those who would be threatened by success and ridicule from those who doubt competence. The middle manager who announces plans to revolutionize company culture before understanding the political landscape often finds herself reassigned to projects where such ambitions are impossible to pursue. This premature disclosure of ambition creates multiple dangers. First, it allows potential opponents to organize resistance before plans can gain momentum. Second, it establishes expectations that become sources of embarrassment if goals aren't achieved quickly. Third, it can be perceived as overreach or disloyalty, suggesting the person isn't content with their current role and may not be fully committed to existing initiatives. The successful individual learns to advance ambitions through action rather than announcement, building support and demonstrating capability before revealing full intentions. They understand that power is most effectively accumulated quietly, through consistent performance and strategic relationship building, rather than through public declarations that invite scrutiny and opposition. Part 2, The Machinery of Self-Destruction. The sixth moment of verbal catastrophe emerges when individuals attempt to defend themselves against accusations by providing detailed explanations that inadvertently supply ammunition to their accusers. This phenomenon, which Machiavelli observed in the political machinations of his era, demonstrates how the impulse to clear one's name often accelerates the very destruction it seeks to prevent. The human tendency to over-explain when under pressure transforms defensive speech into prosecutorial evidence. Consider the predicament of a Renaissance banker accused of favoring certain clients in his lending practices. Rather than offering a simple denial or requesting specific evidence, he chose to provide elaborate explanations of his decision-making process, detailed accounts of his relationships with various clients, and extensive justifications for each transaction under question. In doing so, he inadvertently revealed information about other questionable practices, exposed the names of clients who preferred confidentiality, and demonstrated a pattern of decision-making that his accusers could characterize as corrupt. His attempt to prove innocence became proof of guilt, and his career in banking ended not because of the original accusations, but because of what his defensive responses revealed. This dynamic persists in contemporary settings with ruthless consistency. The corporate executive accused of insider trading who provides detailed timelines of stock transactions often reveals patterns that prosecutors hadn't previously identified. The politician accused of ethical violations who explains the reasoning behind each questioned decision frequently exposes additional questionable activities. The academic accused of plagiarism who provides extensive documentation of their research process sometimes reveals other instances of academic misconduct. Machiavelli's insight into this phenomenon recognizes that accusers often begin with incomplete information, using initial charges as fishing expeditions designed to prompt revelations that provide stronger cases. The wise individual understands that defensive speech should be minimal and strategic, focusing on discrediting accusations rather than providing detailed alternative explanations that can be dissected and reinterpreted by hostile audiences. The seventh moment occurs when individuals reveal confidential information about others, believing such revelations will demonstrate trustworthiness or provide valuable intelligence to new allies. This miscalculation reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how trust operates in competitive environments. The person who shares confidential information about previous employers, colleagues, or associates may believe they're proving their value to new relationships, but they're actually demonstrating their unreliability to anyone capable of strategic thinking. The psychology underlying this behavior often stems from a desire to appear knowledgeable, connected, and valuable. The job candidate who shares details about former employers' strategic plans during an interview may believe such information demonstrates industry insight. Instead, it signals to the interviewer that confidential information will similarly be shared if this person ever leaves their company. The consultant who reveals details about other clients' operations may think such knowledge proves expertise, but actually proves that future clients' information will be similarly compromised. Machiavelli understood that reputation for discretion is among the most valuable assets an individual can possess. Those known for keeping confidences attract confidences, while those known for sharing secrets find themselves excluded from important information. The successful person recognizes that maintaining confidentiality about others' affairs signals reliability in protecting one's own affairs, while betraying confidences signals that betrayal is part of one's character. The eighth catastrophic moment manifests when individuals attempt to impress others by exaggerating their accomplishments, connections, or capabilities. This form of self-destructive speech reflects the human tendency to present idealized versions of reality, yet it creates vulnerabilities that skilled opponents can exploit ruthlessly. The person who claims credit for achievements they didn't earn, relationships they don't possess, or skills they haven't developed creates a house of cards that collapses dramatically when subjected to scrutiny. The Renaissance merchant who claimed connections to powerful families he'd never met, expertise in markets he'd never entered, and profits from ventures that existed only in his imagination initially impressed potential partners and investors. However, when his claims were investigated by those considering major business relationships, the deception was exposed, and his reputation was destroyed not just for the specific lies, but for the character flaw they revealed. He became known not just as someone who had lied, but as someone who would lie, making future business relationships impossible. This pattern repeats endlessly in contemporary professional environments. The executive who claims an MBA from a prestigious university on their resume may successfully navigate initial interviews, but the eventual discovery transforms a qualification gap into a character issue. The consultant who exaggerates their role in successful projects may win contracts based on false credentials, but the truth emerges when clients expect performance levels that the exaggerated experience can't deliver. Machiavelli's analysis of this phenomenon reveals that the temporary advantages gained through exaggeration are invariably outweighed by the permanent damage to credibility when deception is discovered. The successful individual understands that building reputation requires patience and authentic achievement, while destroying reputation can be accomplished instantly through dishonest self-presentation. The ninth moment of verbal destruction occurs when individuals reveal future plans that depend on circumstances beyond their control. This premature revelation of dependent plans creates expectations that become sources of embarrassment and perceived failure when circumstances don't align as anticipated. The manager who announces plans to expand the department contingent on budget approval may find that budget denial reflects not just on resource allocation decisions, but on their ability to accurately assess organizational priorities and their influence within the company. This dynamic particularly affects individuals in middle management and emerging leadership positions who feel pressure to demonstrate vision and ambition but lack the authority to guarantee outcomes. The department head who announces plans to implement new technologies contingent on executive approval may believe such announcements demonstrate forward-thinking leadership. However, if approvals don't materialize, the announcement becomes evidence of poor judgment in reading organizational priorities or overestimating personal influence. The successful individual learns to distinguish between plans they can execute independently and plans that depend on others' decisions or external circumstances. They understand that announcing dependent plans creates accountability for outcomes they can't control, while achieving results before announcing them demonstrates competence and builds reputation for effectiveness. The 10th and, perhaps most devastating moment occurs when individuals attempt to leverage one relationship against another, revealing the manipulation to one or both parties involved. This form of verbal catastrophe demonstrates how the impulse to maximize advantage from relationship management can destroy the very relationships being managed. The individual who tells one powerful contact about their connections to another powerful contact may believe such revelation increases their perceived value, but often accomplishes the opposite by exposing the calculating nature of their relationship approach. Consider the ambitious courtier in Machiavelli's era who attempted to strengthen his position with one noble family by revealing his connections to a rival family. He believed this would demonstrate his valuable network and unique position to provide intelligence about competitors. Instead, both families concluded that he was unreliable, using each relationship to manipulate the other, and therefore couldn't be trusted with sensitive information or important responsibilities. His attempt to leverage relationships destroyed both relationships and eliminated his access to the corridors of power he sought to navigate. This pattern manifests in modern professional and social contexts with equal destructive force. The business development executive who tells one client about relationships with competitors may believe such information demonstrates market knowledge and network strength. However, clients often interpret such revelations as warnings about how their own confidential information might be shared. The individual attempting to leverage multiple relationships simultaneously often finds all relationships compromised when the manipulation becomes apparent. Part 3, The Wisdom of Strategic Silence. The profound implications of these 10 moments of verbal destruction extend far beyond individual career management or personal advancement. They reveal fundamental principles about human nature, power dynamics, and the architecture of trust that govern all forms of organized human activity. Machiavelli's insights into when speech becomes self-destruction illuminate not just tactical considerations for personal success, but strategic understanding of how information, timing, and relationship management determine the rise and fall of individuals, organizations, and even nations. The underlying psychology that makes these verbal catastrophes so predictable stems from basic human needs for validation, connection, and recognition that remain constant across centuries and cultures. The Renaissance courtier seeking favor through shared gossip and the modern executive building relationships through confidential revelations are responding to identical psychological drives. The difference lies not in motivation, but in understanding the consequences of satisfying these drives through speech rather than through strategic action. Machiavelli's analysis reveals that successful individuals develop what might be termed communicative discipline, the ability to satisfy psychological needs for connection and validation without compromising strategic position. This discipline manifests in multiple forms: the patience to build relationships through consistent actions rather than impressive revelations, the confidence to allow achievements to speak for themselves rather than embellishing them verbally, and the wisdom to understand that temporary advantages gained through premature disclosure are inevitably outweighed by permanent damage to reputation and position. The development of such discipline requires recognizing that every conversation is simultaneously a relationship-building opportunity and a potential source of vulnerability. The skilled practitioner of strategic communication learns to navigate this duality by focusing on what others need to hear rather than what they themselves want to say. They understand that effective communication serves the audience's interests while protecting the speaker's position, rather than serving the speaker's ego at the expense of strategic advantage. This approach to communication reflects a deeper understanding of power dynamics that Machiavelli observed throughout his political career. Information truly is power, but only when it's deployed strategically rather than shared impulsively. The person who possesses valuable information but lacks the discipline to control its dissemination becomes a conduit for others' advantage rather than a creator of their own advantage. They transform from a source of power into a victim of their own lack of control. The temporal dimension of these verbal catastrophes deserves particular attention. In each of the 10 moments identified, timing determines whether speech creates opportunity or destruction. The revelation that would be devastating if shared prematurely might be powerful if shared at the proper moment with the appropriate audience. The criticism that destroys relationships when expressed impulsively might strengthen relationships when shared strategically with trusted advisors. The ambitious plan that invites ridicule when announced too early might inspire support when revealed after demonstrating initial progress. This temporal sensitivity requires developing an intuitive understanding of what Machiavelli called the quality of the times, the ability to read circumstances and relationships with sufficient accuracy to predict how communications will be received and what consequences they will generate. The successful individual learns to recognize when circumstances favor revelation versus concealment, when relationships are strong enough to support difficult conversations, and when organizational dynamics make ambitious plans appear realistic rather than delusional. The geographical and cultural variations in communication norms add another layer of complexity to strategic speech. What builds trust in one culture may signal weakness in another. What demonstrates leadership in one organization may suggest insubordination in another. The successful individual develops sensitivity to these variations, adapting communication style to optimize effectiveness within specific contexts while maintaining consistency in underlying strategic principles. The relationship between verbal restraint and authentic relationship building presents a paradox that Machiavelli understood but didn't fully resolve. Genuine human connection often requires vulnerability and openness, yet strategic success often demands careful control of information sharing. The most successful individuals learn to navigate this tension by developing relationships with different levels of intimacy and information access. They maintain inner circles where more open communication is possible while exercising greater restraint in broader professional and social contexts. The role of technology in amplifying the consequences of verbal mistakes adds a modern dimension that Machiavelli couldn't have anticipated but would certainly have understood. Digital communication creates permanent records of statements that were intended to be temporary, expands audiences far beyond intended recipients, and accelerates the speed at which damaging information spreads. The email criticism intended for a close colleague but accidentally sent to an entire organization, the social media post meant for friends but visible to professional contacts, the video conference comment forgotten while recording. These modern examples demonstrate how technology has increased the stakes of verbal miscalculations while reducing the opportunity for damage control. The psychological burden of maintaining strategic silence can be substantial, particularly for individuals whose personalities naturally tend toward openness and emotional expressiveness. The constant calculation of what to say, when to say it, and to whom to say it can feel artificial and exhausting. Machiavelli acknowledged this challenge but argued that the alternatives, career destruction, relationship damage, and strategic disadvantage, make the effort worthwhile for those seeking positions of influence and responsibility. The development of communication discipline often requires reframing silence from passive restraint to active strategy. Rather than viewing controlled speech as limiting self-expression, the strategically minded individual learns to see it as maximizing the impact of self-expression. By choosing words carefully and timing revelations strategically, they ensure that their communications achieve maximum positive effect while minimizing risk of unintended consequences. The training required to develop such discipline resembles the preparation necessary for any high-stakes performance. Athletes train their bodies to perform precisely under pressure. Strategic communicators must train their minds to maintain control under similar pressure. This training involves practicing restraint in low-stakes situations, developing internal systems for evaluating communication decisions before implementation, and building relationships with trusted advisors who can provide honest feedback about communication effectiveness. The ultimate goal of embracing Machiavellian principles of strategic communication isn't to become manipulative or dishonest, but to become more effective in achieving legitimate objectives while building authentic relationships. The person who masters these principles can pursue ambitious goals, provide honest counsel, and maintain meaningful connections while avoiding the self-inflicted wounds that destroy many promising careers and personal relationships. The legacy of these principles extends beyond individual application to organizational and societal levels. Organizations that understand the value of strategic communication develop cultures where information is shared thoughtfully rather than impulsively, where criticism is channeled constructively rather than destructively, and where ambitious goals are pursued systematically rather than announced prematurely. Such organizations consistently outperform competitors who fail to recognize the strategic dimensions of internal and external communication. The broader societal implications involve recognizing that the same principles governing individual communication success apply to public discourse, diplomatic relations, and democratic governance. Nations that master strategic communication maintain more effective relationships with allies, negotiate more successfully with adversaries, and project power more effectively than nations that communicate impulsively or without consideration of long-term consequences. In conclusion, the 10 moments when talking costs everything serve as more than cautionary tales. They provide a framework for understanding how communication shapes destiny at individual, organizational, and societal levels. Machiavelli's insights remain relevant not because human nature has remained unchanged, but because the fundamental dynamics of power, trust, and strategic advantage operate according to timeless principles that transcend specific historical periods or cultural contexts. The wise individual learns from these examples not to become silent and calculating, but to become thoughtful and strategic in how they use the powerful tool of human communication. They understand that words, once spoken, cannot be retrieved, that trust, once broken, cannot be easily repaired, and that reputation, once damaged, requires enormous effort to restore. Armed with this understanding, they approach communication as a craft requiring skill, practice, and continuous refinement rather than as a natural expression requiring no particular thought or preparation. The ultimate measure of success in applying these principles lies not in what one avoids saying, but in what one achieves through strategic communication. The goal is not silence, but effectiveness, using words as tools to build rather than weapons that destroy, choosing revelation over concealment when circumstances favor openness, and maintaining the discipline to protect valuable information until it can be deployed for maximum positive impact. Those who master these principles find that strategic communication becomes not a constraint on authentic self-expression, but an enhancement of it. By understanding when and how to speak effectively, they ensure that their voices carry weight when they choose to use them, that their words achieve intended effects rather than unintended consequences, and that their communication builds the relationships and opportunities necessary to accomplish their most important objectives. In this mastery lies the difference between those who shape their circumstances and those who become victims of their own verbal mistakes.